Morning, all of you. Today, we are having Gary Graff with us. Gary Graff has over 35 years of investigative experience, serving 23 years with the Federal Bureau of Investigation, working violent crime, corruption, fraud, and narcotics, and specializing in complex cases. He has substantial trials and testimonial experience. Gary was a certified police instructor, firearm and SWAT instructor, and FBI evidence response team member. He has a Bachelor of Science degree in Electrical Engineering and graduated from the FBI National Academy. He is a certified fraud examiner through ECFE, certified blood stain pattern analyst through IAI, and certified in force science through Force Science Institute. Gary, in collaboration with his partner Iris Daly Graff, developed and present training in crime scene and evidence reconstruction and general investigation. Together, the Graff trained throughout the United States, Canada, and other countries. Most training provided is done in a collaboration with TriTech Forensics. Now, it is over to you, sir. So we are welcome you, sir, over here at Paro University, and now you can start with your rant.
Okay, well, thank you very much. It is really an honor and a pleasure to be able to share principles of reconstructing evidence with the university and those associated with it. I really appreciate Dr. Tanya and her invitation to share this, and I hope that this presentation will be an introduction to what we do in reconstruction. So when you get to a crime scene and you're there working it, or perhaps you're the lead investigator at the scene and things are going crazy, there's blood everywhere, it's a violent scene, and people are running every which way and a lot of things going on, and the supervisor shows up, and what is the question that they ask normally? Well, it's what happened here? And of course, we don't know the answer right away. It takes time. It takes time to reconstruct a scene. It takes time to reconstruct that evidence. So we may be thinking to ourselves, well, boss, ask me that question maybe in a couple days, because right now I don't know any more than you do. So crime scene reconstruction, we're going to cover some basic principles of it, a little bit about the foundation and the history, some methodology, the structured methodology to reconstructing evidence. We'll talk a little bit about how to report our findings using graphics in the analytical process. We'll talk a little bit about court, and we will discuss some case studies as we go along and give you some case examples. And if you have questions, if there's time at the end, I'll be happy to answer questions. We could also email us, and we would be happy to answer questions through email as well. So what is crime scene reconstruction? Well, it's identifying causes and effects. Nothing just happens. Everything happens for a reason. In crime scene reconstruction, we are identifying evidence, and we're identifying relationships between items of evidence. Evidence just doesn't get there. It is something has to act on evidence to create it. So we're also going to try to identify the cause or the action that created the evidence in the scene. There is a methodology to doing this, and we'll discuss that as we go along. Oftentimes we use logic and common sense to resolve issues and questions. And the reconstruction, as we learn these principles and practice them, it should become a mindset for all different types of investigation, not just violent crime, but all investigation. The methodology that we use promotes objectivity and helps us to be objective in our analysis. Essentially, what we're doing with Reconstruction is we're organizing our information and we're evaluating it, and our result will form a picture of what took place. We also will take the evidence that the perpetrator left us in the scene and reverse engineer it. We'll work backwards as part of determining what did or did not happen in the scene. In Reconstruction, we're going to explore all possible scenarios, even those that we don't necessarily like. And forensics is a process of exclusion. And what we're doing is we're excluding scenarios that don't work, excluding scenarios that are impossible. And in the process of doing that, we will use the scientific method. And we'll discuss that a little later, how that works. And ultimately, we are going to determine the best explanation as to what happened or what did not happen in the scene. So for an example, a shooting scene. You may get the story that the husband said, well, I was showing my wife the gun and it just went off all by itself. It just went off. Well, guns don't shoot themselves. Guns don't shoot people. People shoot people. So we can exclude that as a possibility. Now, there might be some other issues with the firearm. Maybe there's a problem with the trigger mechanism where you could bump the gun or drop the gun and it might go off. It's rare, but that does happen. That's why in shooting incidents, when the firearm is recovered, almost always we will ask for a function test to see if that's possible. So until that possibility is excluded, we must consider it as a possibility. So Sherlock Holmes is a fictional character, but the author was very brilliant and knew a lot about investigation. And one of the quotes in one of the books about Sherlock Holmes was, "We will eliminate all other factors, and that which remains must be the truth." So even Sherlock Holmes understood the principle that forensics is a process of elimination. And we eliminate as many possibilities as we can, and then we evaluate what's left as the truth. So Holmes also applied other principles, Reconstruction principles, in his investigations. One of the things that he did was he identified actions or events that occurred as part of the crime. He also identified relationships between those actions and then sequenced them. And that's what we do in Reconstruction. We identify actions that create the evidence. We identify relationships between the evidence and the actions, and then we sequence it. So there was another fellow that practiced this principle years ago, Edward Heinrich, and he used the cause and effect to determine circumstances. He, as part of his teaching, said that we take each fact that we know in the case, each item of evidence, we evaluate it. Is that fact relevant to the scene? We may have a shooting scene and we may have some bloodstain patterns. Well, are those bloodstain patterns part of this incident, or are they part of a different incident somewhere, at some other time? So we need to know that before we include that particular item in our analysis. So we want to evaluate our facts, make sure that they're relevant to the case at hand before we try to fit them into our puzzle. So reconstruction then of events or actions is we're associating these events and the factual evidence with the actions that created them. And that's what Edward Heinrich, one of the things that he taught. So crime scene reconstruction is a lot of things, and we've mentioned a number of them. There also are a few things that it is not. It is not subjective conjecture. It's not accusations. It's not what we see on TV. We don't have a crystal ball to have all the answers. And it's not somebody's theory of the case. Crime scene reconstruction is based in objective factual evidence. So one of the pioneers, another pioneer of reconstruction was Hans Gross. He was a magistrate in Austria for a number of years. He wrote a book in 1893, Criminal Investigation. And he was truly a leader in these principles during his time of his life. And some key things that he taught that we can learn from. Preconceived theories, the most deadly enemy of all inquiries. If we go into an investigation with a preconceived notion as to what happened, we tend to look for evidence to support that theory and ignore evidence that does not support that theory. And that leads us astray. And Hans Gross warned us about that over 100 years ago. Another concept that he taught was the importance of, when analyzing a crime, the tedious collection of evidence, tedious collection and preservation of evidence. We need to take our time in processing the scene, pay attention to the little details, and very carefully and methodically collect the evidence. One of the failures that we often see as we evaluate cases is the lack of attention to detail in the collection process. He also stated that human testimony is much overrated. Stories that we hear from people, from witnesses, from suspects, and from others are oftentimes not on the mark. Why is that? Well, sometimes people lie. Other times people are trying to tell the truth, but they're telling us what they perceive, and perceptions sometimes are off. So Hans Gross warned us about using human testimony in our analysis. He also talked about evidentiary relationships, and that evidence must, in order to have meaning, evidence must be viewed in context of the scene. We must include context in our evaluation. And I'll give you some examples of that here shortly. So getting back to Mr. Holmes, Watson asked him a question there that Holmes didn't seem to be engaged. And Holmes's response was, well, there's no data yet. In other words, we don't have all the evidence yet. It's a capital mistake to theorize before you have all the evidence. It biases the judgment. So we want to be careful about getting involved in our investigations and creating theories of the case before we have all our evidence. So there are several organizations that recognize crime scene reconstruction as a forensic discipline. You're probably, most folks are probably familiar with the International Association of Identification, the IAI. It's a worldwide pardon me, organization, forensic organization. And crime scene reconstruction is part of that. Also, the International Association of Bloodstain Pattern Analysts, when analyzing bloodstain patterns, we often use some of the reconstruction principles. And then there's the Association for Crime Scene Reconstruction. So crime scene reconstruction is the analysis of objective evidence versus subjective evidence. So what is subjective evidence? Well, statements. He said, she said. It may be assumptions based on prior experience. Investigative experience is a good thing, but sometimes it can lead to snap judgments. Oh, I've seen this before. I know what this is. It's such and such. And you may be wrong. So prior experience is a good thing, but we have to be careful and realize that every investigation, every case, every crime is slightly different. And we have to keep an open mind. Another thing we want to be careful about with subjectivity in our investigation is assumptions based on expected behavior. In other words, if we think we know how people should behave under certain circumstances, people are not machines, and they do behave differently. So we want to be careful about making assumptions about behavior. So in reconstruction and crime scene reconstruction, we avoid subjective evidence and we focus on objective evidence. The subjective evidence, if we rely on that or include it in our analysis, it may lead us astray. So what is objective evidence? Well, normally it's items of physical evidence. And questions we need to ask as we're looking through a crime scene and we're looking at an item of evidence is, well, is this evidence related to this incident? That's one question we need to ask. Does this item of evidence have a purpose and function in this crime scene? What is the context around this item of evidence? How did it get here? So these are questions that we need to ask. So to give you an example, this was a double homicide in a campground in a forest. And up on the upper left, you can see the sketch. And there's a body that's next to the van there. And there's also another body up next to the picnic table. These two individuals were shot by somebody. So in the picture in the lower right, this is the picture of the victim next to the van. You'll see a little red arrow there, and it's pointing to a fiber. And there were several others of these fibers found in the scene, but one is resting on the shoulder of the victim. So when you look at that fiber, well, it's not a natural fiber. It didn't grow in the woods. So what is its purpose? What is its function in this scene? What is the context around that fiber? These are questions that could lead, that could have investigative value. So after some discussion, it was determined that those fibers were consistent with fibers found in a ghillie suit. So what is a ghillie suit? Well, a ghillie suit is an item of clothing that someone can put over their body, and it helps them to hide in the woods. In the military, snipers will wear ghillie suits to sneak up on the enemy and to find positions where they can do their work. So in this case, maybe the perpetrator here had a ghillie suit. And sure enough, when the perpetrator was found, the perpetrator had a ghillie suit, and here it is on a model. This is what it looked like. So the last thing that that victim saw before the victim was executed was this thing approaching her with a rifle in its hand. You can just imagine how terrified the victim was right before she died. So, objective evidence. When we're looking at objective evidence, again, that's what we do in Reconstruction. We start by looking for that evidence that is what we call facts beyond change. That's going to be the foundation of our analysis. So, what are facts beyond change? Well, one example would be a measured trajectory in the scene. You have some bullet defects and you're able to establish a trajectory. In other words, you know where the bullet came from. That is a fact beyond change. Another example is an incapacitating wound. For example, a shot through the midbrain is immediately incapacitating. The body ceases all purposeful muscle function, and the only force working on the muscles at that point would be gravity. So an incapacitating wound is a fact beyond change that could be very helpful in the analysis, because we know that that person had no purposeful movement after that wound occurred. A bloodstain pattern is a fact beyond change. It was created somehow, and that's a fact beyond change. So other facts beyond change that we use as the foundation for our analysis might be forensic and laboratory reports. So crime scene reconstruction is an evaluation of all of the evidence in the scene. That's going to include the pathologist's report, the autopsy when it comes back in, forensic biology, DNA reports, forensic chemistry, impression evidence like fingerprints, for example, bloodstain pattern evidence, ballistic evidence. All of these different types of evidence that may be recovered from our scene are included in our evaluation of what happened. This makes up our forensic evidence. So we take that forensic evidence and then we try to establish relationships between items of evidence. We try to establish timing and sequencing. And in this process, we're using logic and common sense. We include scene context. Context gives meaning to evidence. So that's a very important part of our evaluation. And when we do all this, we end up with what we call a hypothesis. Our hypothesis is a theory of what happened during this event, or during this one small part of the event. So then we take our hypothesis and we test it using the scientific method. And then if it passes the test, then we end up with what we call a best explanation of what happened during the event. And that is our conclusion. Our conclusion is our best explanation. So let me touch briefly on the scientific method. So we take a problem, which normally is going to be a narrow investigative question, and we come up with a scenario, a viable scenario, and that is our hypothesis. We think it may have happened this way. Then we review all of our evidence, not just the evidence we like, but all of it that's collected in the scene, and all the evidence that I just talked about in the previous slides from all the different sources. And then we make predictions. What we're doing with our predictions is we're saying, well, if the hypothesis is true, then I predict this and this and this. And then we test our predictions and compare them against the evidence. Albert Einstein used to say, when he used this process, that his testing oftentimes was a thought process. He would think through this with using logic and common sense and experience, and that was how he tested his predictions. Now, testing can also be laboratory testing. We can go to the range and shoot different substrates and try to duplicate what happened in the scene. So testing may be in a laboratory, or it may just be a thought process. So after we've done our testing, we will either accept or reject our hypothesis, or we may modify it. And the scientific method, ultimately, it's an ever-expanding, self-correcting process. As we test certain questions, that creates new questions, and we have to go ahead and test those as well. And then that creates new questions, and eventually we get through all the questions that we have in the investigation, and try to resolve them. One of the things that we do also with the scientific method, and this is very important, and that is to work through a null hypothesis. In other words, we take our theory and we go through all the steps that I just mentioned, and then we take the opposite theory and we run through the same process. And we should be very serious about this. This is not a perfunctory exercise. We try to prove ourselves wrong, and if we do that with due diligence and work through it, it increases our accuracy, and we can feel a lot better that we have the right answers. So let me review some of the supporting principles of crime scene reconstruction. We've talked a lot about the process here and some of the theory behind it and so forth, and the scientific method. But let's talk about some of the scientific principles that support crime scene reconstruction. So these are some of the associated principles that I'm going to talk about. There's four key ones, and we'll go ahead and take them one at a time, starting with Nicholas Steno. So Nicholas Steno was a scientist back in the 1600s from Denmark, and he has two laws that we use in reconstruction. The first one is the law of superposition, and the other is the law of lateral continuity. So let's take a look at each one of those individually. So Steno's law of superposition is quite simple. The bottom layer is older than the top layer. In other words, what's on the bottom went down first. It can get a little more complicated than that, but that's the gist of it. So, for example, in this photograph, we have broken glass, and then we have blood on top of the broken glass. So as we look at that photograph, well, that might be a little hard to tell. So when you're documenting your crime scene and you're looking at it, you say, well, the blood is clearly on top of the glass. That would be something you'd want to include in your field notes. So in this particular case, this was a homicide case. The glass was broken first. The person was a home invasion, went inside, shot the person at home, and then the person at home was bleeding as he crossed the threshold of the door here that had the broken glass in it and bled on top of the glass. So here's another case. This woman was stabbed to death multiple times in her bathroom. And we have some superposition here. You can see a pair of glasses. There's blood under the glasses. Therefore, there was bleeding. And then the glasses were moved or fell on top of the blood. And then her arm ended up on top of the glasses. So these are little details that may or may not have meaning in your case, but you don't know that until after you've looked at all the evidence. So you want to make notes of these items of superposition because they may be relevant. So let's take a look at Stenel's law of lateral continuity. This is a highway that passes through St. Louis, and you can see where they dug out in the rock there for the exits. And so it looks like they dug down a number of meters there for the road. And at one time, all of that was together. So you can look at the layers of rock and kind of match them up across that highway stretch there. So at one time, that was all one before it was dug out. So lateral continuity is often a factor in archaeology, but it's also a factor in crime scene reconstruction. So let me give you an example. This was a case where the husband heard a gunshot and called the police and said that his wife had committed suicide. Well, can we corroborate or refute his story? So this is the scene. On the right there, you can see the revolver laying on the floor, and there's some blood there to the left. So in this particular case, she was shot in the head at close range. And headshots are particularly bloody and oftentimes will produce what we call backspatter. And if the shot perforates the head, it will produce forward spatter. So I've got an example here of a bullet shooting a blood-soaked sponge, and let's take a look at that. You can see this is slowed down in slow motion. The bullet goes through the sponge, and you can see blood going forward. You can also see blood going backwards in the direction the bullet came from. That's what's called backspatter. So you'll oftentimes see forward spatter or backspatter in head wounds. Heads are very vacuous. There's a lot of blood. When the bullet enters, it's creating a lot of pressure inside the head. That pressure has to go somewhere, so it will come out the holes that were created by the bullet. So that spatter that we see when the bullet goes into the target, or in this case the head, is instantaneous to the perforation or the penetration of the bullet. I mean, it happens essentially at the same time. So in this particular case, can we look at lateral continuity and will it tell us what happened? So this was the revolver, and you can see that there's backspatter on the revolver. This was an incapacitating wound. So immediately after she was shot, if she was holding the pistol, she would have dropped it. She would not have had the capacity to hang on to it. And we also have backspatter on the other side of the pistol. So that's consistent with her wound. This pistol was in the vicinity of that wound when it was created. Well, let's take a look at her hands. And we can look at her hands and see that that is consistent with backspatter. There's a significant amount of force when a bullet strikes a head, and that force creates tiny stains that are small. They don't travel very far, less than a meter generally, to create any kind of a pattern. So we have a pattern of backspatter on her hands. And if you look at the palm of her hand, that palm is free of blood. It's clean. That's consistent with holding the pistol. That's why we don't see any blood there. So her right hand was in the vicinity of that wound and it was holding something. In the context of this scene, that's all consistent with holding the pistol, and that's consistent with this being a self-inflicted wound. So another principle that comes into play a lot with Reconstruction is chronology. And there's two types of chronology. The first one is what we call absolute, and then the other is relative. And let's take a look at both of them. So absolute chronology is knowing exactly when something happened. When you go into the grocery store and you make a purchase, it creates an electronic record of that transaction. You know to the minute and the second when you purchase your groceries. If we have video evidence, the video will document exactly when things took place. That's absolute chronology. So relative chronology is sequencing actions or events. We may not know exactly what time they occurred, but we know that action A occurred before action B. So there's three basic relationships that we're looking at with chronology. It's something that happened before something else, something that happened at the same time as something else, and then something that happened after something else. For example, we have a van here that was, we have a shooting and a burglary that took place. The burglary portion of it, the driver's side window was broken and the glass was shattered all the way across the compartment over to the passenger side. That's the burglary component. The shooting component, in this case, the victim was over, this was a headshot. The victim was over in the passenger side, low in the well there. And what you see there is backspatter from the gunshot wound to her head. So while she was in that position, she bled, and you see some blood deposited there on the step leading up into the passenger's seat. And you see the glass broken from the burglary component, and that glass is on top of the blood. So what do we have here? We've got superposition, but we can also sequence events. The glass is on top of the blood, so the glass was broken after the gunshot wound. In this particular case, the blood had dried. So there was a question in this case as to when this happened. Did it happen generally contemporaneous with the homicide, or did it happen sometime after? Well, we don't know the specific time, but we know that the time period was long enough for that blood to dry before the glass was broken. And in this case, that would have been hours, at least hours. This was at night. Blood takes generally longer to dry at night. So again, this is another example of superposition and relative chronology. So one other principle of crime scene reconstruction is given to us by Edmund Locard, and he was known as the Sherlock Holmes of France. And one of the concepts that Locard gave us was his principle of exchange. And basically what that means is every contact leaves a trace of physical material. And it's the basis for all of our trace evidence examinations. And it gets back to the principle of cause and effect. Something causes something that has a result. And when two items come in contact with each other, the effect is trace evidence. So for example, this is bullet wipe. These are bullet holes in a wall. And when the bullet leaves the firearm, it has a lead trace on it. And when it strikes a target surface, it leaves some of that trace on the surface. It's called bullet wipe. And that's an example of Locard's principle of exchange. When two automobiles come in contact with each other in an auto accident, there may be a transfer of paint from one automobile to the other. That's another example. So that summarizes the key principles that we use in Reconstruction, key scientific principles. So let's take a quick look at the analytical process. I mentioned earlier that there's a specific methodology to doing this. Well, what is that methodology? So a quick overview is case management, that is organizing your evidence for analysis, preparing it in such a way to facilitate analysis. We're going to identify and relate actions that occurred in our scene. We're going to sequence those actions, do a final audit, and then tidy it all up into a report. So let me give you a case example of this process and how it works. So this was reported to police as a home invasion. And at about 10 o'clock in the evening, the homeowner said that he was in bed and he heard glass breaking. He obtained his revolver and went to investigate. And he sees somebody coming through his patio door. He shoots him twice. And the man collapses dead right there. And then he calls police. He said he touched nothing in the scene. So that's his story. Let's look at the evidence and see if we can corroborate his story. So here in the upper left is the patio door that's broken. And outside we see a volume of blood on his porch. The lower right picture is the deceased just inside the patio door, where where the homeowner says he shot him. So looking at the wounds, there's two gunshot wounds. Up at the top, we see a fairly level shot right through the chest, slightly downward. And then the bottom sketch shows an upward trajectory into his back. Those are the two wounds. The chest wound at top goes all the way through. It's a perforating wound. And the wound at the bottom stayed in him. In other words, that's a penetrating wound. It did not pass through him. So the first thing we'll do with this is we'll organize all our case materials, our scene images. We'll carefully examine all of our images, looking for evidence and detail. We'll examine all of our forensic reports and laboratory reports. And we'll organize all this material. So we've identified all of our evidence at this point, and we're going to try to identify actions that created that evidence. So when we're identifying actions, what are we looking for? Well, we're looking for who, somebody committed the action. What action was it? When did it occur? Can we sequence it to another action? Where did it occur? And then how did it occur? Is it related to other actions that took place in the scene? So looking at the gunshot wounds, for example, here is the open door, and we see spatter on both sides of the doorway. In the context of this scene, the only source of this blood would have been one of the two gunshot wounds. And at this particular point, these patterns are fairly high on the door, about 100 centimeters above the floor. So we can conclude that this is the victim's blood. We can conclude that the victim was upright at the time this spatter event occurred. There's also another impact spatter pattern way down low on the outside of the doorway. And again, this in the context of this scene, those are two separate patterns, So one is associated to one of the gunshot wounds, and this one that I'm showing you now is associated with the other gunshot wound. In the context of this scene, that's the only possibility to create these two particular patterns. So here is the deceased, and the broken glass is on top of him in a number of locations. And also the broken glass is on top of the blood. So what that tells us, Steno's law of superposition, the glass was broken after the body was there and after the blood was there. So crime scene reconstruction is a structured methodology. We're working through this. We've identified our evidence. Now we're identifying actions that created this evidence. And now we need to start sequencing those actions. Ultimately, we will sequence those actions and put it in a flow chart. Makes it a lot easier to explain. And we'll make a flow chart of the actions that occurred in the scene. And then we'll also consider alternative sequences. And sometimes there are some. If they're viable, we also must consider that it could have happened different ways. So in sequencing these actions, this pattern, the patterns on both doorways, the doorway had to be open. The door had to be open when this when these two patterns were created. That's consistent with the gunshot to the chest. And we know that the victim was upright in order to create these patterns. These small blood droplets do not travel very far, so the victim was upright and close when this pattern was created. The other pattern, the downward pattern, would be consistent with the victim turning and falling, as you can see in the sketch to the right there. The victim turning and falling as he's exiting the door, that backspatter occurred from that second shot in the back, which would have created this pattern. We would certainly test both ways using the scientific method. And when we do that, it confirms that we can sequence these shots. The first shot was upright facing the shooter, and the second shot was as he's exiting the door, creating this bloodstain pattern on the exterior of the house. So we can sequence these two shots. We can also sequence what took place afterward. There's drag marks in the blood volume out on the porch, so the victim was dragged back inside. Then the glass was broken because the glass ended up on top of the victim and also on top of his blood. So he was shot, and then he bled on the floor, and then the glass was broken. We can sequence all three of those events. So we continue that same process with all the other evidence in the scene. When we're finished, we will do a final audit. We'll double check all of our data. We'll double check all our reports, make sure everything is accurate, make sure all our sequences are accurate. Any difficult sequences, we'll go back through with the scientific method and try to prove ourselves wrong. And then when we're all finished with that, we'll wrap up our conclusions and summary in a report and flow charts, and we'll have it peer reviewed before we publish it. So case management evaluates all of our evidence, puts it all in its proper place. From that, we determine actions, and then we sequence those actions. We audit all of our work, and then wrap it up in a report. And our flow chart might look something like this for this particular case. And basically, it sequences the events relative to each other. So in the reporting process, I'm not going to go into that other than this slide here, but we need to carefully report everything that we've done, and we'll start out with an introduction and the disclaimer that's listed there. Basically, what we're saying there is these are our conclusions based on the evidence that we have. If additional evidence is made available, we will consider it. In our report, we want to list all of our references, and that's all of the crime scene evidence, all of the images, all of the forensic reports, everything that we used to create the report. We're going to list it. The body of our report basically describes what we see, what our analysis is, and then that's followed by conclusions from that analysis. And then we're going to attach exhibits and attachments to support everything that we write about in the report. I'll spend a couple minutes here on using graphics in analysis. Oftentimes we think of graphics as something we use in court. We take them to court, to show this stuff to the jury. Well, in crime scene reconstruction, we can use graphics in our analysis, and I'll give you a few examples here. One of the programs that we use is called Home Sweet Home, and it's a free software, and it's up at the top there. You see a two-dimensional diagram, and as you take your scene measurements and incorporate them there in your sketch, it creates a 3D model down below as you're creating the one up above. So it allows us to create 3D models from our 2D sketches as we do the sketch. Again, it's called Sweet Home 3D, and it's free. It's free software available that you can download. Another free software is called GIMP. It's similar to Photoshop, and it can do all the things that Photoshop can do, and it allows you to do image editing. You can highlight evidence or identify relationships in images. And there's a lot of different things you can do with GIMP. It's a very, very valuable tool. Just a couple of examples. This was an image from a crime scene. The husband said that this entertainment center was burglarized over there on the left. Taking this photograph and simply adjusting the levels, it's essentially like turning the light on, and you can see all of the items in that entertainment center. And you can see that they're not really disturbed. In this case, the husband had staged the burglary. Here's another example where you have a shoe recovered from a scene. You have a shoe print in blood. You can bring those images into GIMP and layer them on top of one another to compare. I mean, ultimately, you're going to need to send this to the laboratory for a conclusive analysis, but you can see from the picture that these are the same, and you can certainly see that, well, this is something I need to send to the laboratory. So GIMP can be very helpful in identifying these relationships early in the case, and not have to wait for the evidence to come back from the laboratory. You have this knowledge earlier in the investigation. So another example of using graphics in analysis. This was a situation where the husband called and said, "Oh, my wife just committed suicide in the bedroom." So there's a trajectory that you can see there in the image. And again, a trajectory is a fact beyond change. You look at that trajectory, and it comes out of the wall, and it goes down at an angle through the room. She has a head wound, a perforating head wound, enters the right side, exits the left side. So when you superimpose that wound on the trajectory, this is a possible position that she was in. If we try to move her closer to the wall, she would have to be up on her tippy toes. That doesn't work. So this is as close to the wall as we can put her. We can move her away from the wall, move her over here, and that also works. Now, all the blood in this case, we have some downward spatter on the bed, and we have a pool there at her feet. All of that's it. So again, this type of wound creates a lot of blood quickly. So she was somewhere between this picture and this picture. And then that's consistent with where the husband said she was found when he came into the room. So there was an alternative theory that maybe she was further out into the room. We can test that. You can see from this picture that that's possible, but it's very awkward. And also there's no blood there. So we can exclude that possibility as a possibility. Another thing we can do with graphics is we can take the wounds from an autopsy report and place them on a model. We can take the victim, height and weight and so forth, and create a replica model the same size and shape, and then transpose all of those wounds onto that body. And then we can test scenarios as to how the victim may have received those wounds. And we do that by putting a grid on the body, and again, then taking the data from the autopsy report and putting those wounds, in this case, they're gunshot wounds, onto the body. So here's an example here where this person was shot multiple times, and each one of those white lines is a wound path extended out from the body. So we can take those wound paths. In this particular case, if we have an approximate location of the shooter, then we can take those different wound paths, extend those trajectories out, and we can approximate positions of the victim at the time they were shot. And in this particular case, we were able to sequence a lot of those shots, as you can see there on the screen, from the different wound paths extended back to the shooter. So there are examples and tutorials of how to use some of these free softwares, and that's on our website. And you're free to look at that and look them over, and they're free. Download them. Again, if you have any questions about any of them, you can contact us through the website, and we will be happy to answer your questions. So the last thing I wanted to discuss very briefly is court. And courts work differently in different countries, but are similar in a lot of ways. And in the United States and in a lot of countries, the legislature will enact the laws, the court administrates it, the prosecutor prepares the case for prosecution, the investigative agencies will present the evidence. There may be expert witnesses, for example, expert witnesses in Reconstruction, and then it's up to the jury as to guilt or innocence. So to qualify as an expert in Reconstruction in most courts, they're going to look at your education and training and experience, how long you've been doing it, have you done it before, what type of training you've received, and do you participate in organizations such as the IAI. So jurisdictions vary. In the United States, they vary from state to state, county to county, and of course they vary in different countries. So you want to know what your jurisdiction allows and does not allow. And as far as allowing evidence, Uh, the Daubert standard is used in the United States and UK and in a number of other countries. And some of the questions that are going to ask as far as your evidence, is your testimony, relevant to the case? Is there a history of the discipline? Well, earlier in the presentation, I gave you several people that were around decades, if not centuries ago, that have established a history of Reconstruction. Are your conclusions subjective? Well, in crime scene reconstruction, we stick with the objective evidence. We try to avoid the subjective evidence. And then have the techniques been published and peer reviewed? There are a number of periodicals and books out there on reconstruction. They've been around for a long time, and yes, the techniques have been published and peer reviewed. Is the methodology based on accepted scientific principles? We talked about Locard's principle of exchange and some of the other scientific principles. Yes, it is. And do these techniques have non-judicial uses? Well, a lot of the same principles that we talked about here tonight are used in other disciplines, used in archaeology, for example, airplane crash reconstructions, and so forth. So the answer to that is yes. So that's a lot of information, and we covered a lot of material. Again, we'd be happy to answer questions and facilitate a way to get those questions to us, and we'll get them answered. So that's the end of the presentation.
Hello, sir.
I can stop sharing if you'd like.
So one question is there.
Yes?
Yeah. So question is, can blood spatter pattern be disguised or altered? If it can be,
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question, please?
repeat. So question is, am I audible?
Yes, Vilas.
Yeah. So question is, can blood spatter pattern be disguised or altered? If it is disguised one, then how to identify whether the blood spatter pattern is disguised?
So if I understand the question, how are bloodstain patterns identified?
So,
And can bloodstain patterns be altered? Was that the question?
yes.
Well, the bloodstain patterns, yes, they can be altered, but there would be evidence that they were altered. Bloodstain pattern analysis is a separate discipline that requires extensive training to get good at it. And it is part of reconstruction. But to answer the question, again, bloodstain pattern analysis is a separate discipline. There are a number of different types of patterns. And when you study bloodstain pattern analysis, you learn how the different patterns are created. And again, if bloodstain patterns are altered, there would be evidence of that alteration. And that in itself becomes a separate pattern. I hope that answers the question.
Yes, sir. I got your point. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. It was a very, very interesting and a very nice presentation. And we got to know many more new things. But I do have one question to ask. That you have talked about the
Yes.
reconstruction of crime scene by using virtual technique. Uh, Means which software that you have talked about, and can we able to means work for the outdoor cases as well and indoor cases like that, as you have exampled over there, that we can work for the indoor cases. So it is like, how can we do that?
So uh, the question isn't coming through very clear, and plus I have a little difficulty hearing, but I think you're asking about the free software that I was talking
Yes, sir.
about,
About
the Sweet Home 3D.
reconstruction of, yeah. Yes, sir.
Um, so the Sweet Home 3D again is a free software. You can go online and download it for free, um, and it has a lot of really good different features for it. It's used by builders in constructing houses. They have a library of, of things that we commonly will see in our crime scenes and in our homes: washers, dryers, sofas, tables, and that sort of thing. So it's there's a little bit of a skill set there to train up on it, but it's not overly difficult to use. And there's another program called DAZ that's also free, that allows you to import models of humans uh, into your work product, and then you can position those models to test scenarios. There are examples of this on our website, and we invite everyone to go look at that. And there's some tutorials and so forth you can download for free to help you get started. And if you have questions about how to do it, you can email us, and we would be happy to try to help anyone that's interested in learning how to use those softwares.
Thank you so much, sir. And definitely we are going to go over there, and once we'll look into it, and definitely we'll be back to you. So it was really amazing time.
Okay.
Thank you so much to, to be here at our university at Department of Forensic Science. Thank you once again.
Well, thank you for the opportunity, and I hope it was helpful.
Yes, sir, it is very much helpful, and students are like they are getting lots of information through this, as you have discussed with examples, so they understand it like in a very insightful manner.
Well,
Okay,
if
sir.
anyone else has questions,
Uh,
feel free to contact us.
Definitely, sir. Will share your email ID and your site with students. They'll contact
Okay,
you.
very good. Very good. Thank you. Uh, and have a good night or a good morning. It's good night here.
Good night, sir. Yes, sir. Thank you.
Okay.
Bye.
Okay. Bye bye.